All right,
Pen
great.
and paper.
Pen and paper, old school. Here we go.
Gen X in the house.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining. For those of you who are new, my name is Angie Sanchez. I am a PhD student at Michigan State University in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Spatial Sciences, and my research focuses on increasing access to breastfeeding support resources in Indigenous communities. This is a series of webinars that I decided to put together as a part of a project that I'm working on. It's called the Nooni Project, nooniproject.com. Um, a bigger portion of that project is to bring the Indigenous lactation counselor training to different communities in the state of Michigan. Um, and so to do so, I brought Kim and Cami to the table, and they are graciously helping us with those trainings, but then also are here providing their expertise on all these webinars. We've had some really good conversations. This is our final webinar of this series. We did 9 of them over the past 3 days. 8 of them will be posted on the website because the first one did not record. Technical difficulties, it's all good. It was a great one. You missed it if you weren't there. But we're going to have another good one right here. We're going to talk about milk, how milk is made, milk supply, and go from there. So I'm going to pass the mics over to Kim and Cami and let them take it away and get to work. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Yate. My name is Kimberly Morsales. I'm Dene from Navajo Nation, born in Tuba City. Lived most of my life in Arizona up until almost a year ago. Moved to Northern California among the Hupa, Yurok, and Karuk people. So I am doing some work there, doing community-based lactation. Um, just got a contract with the United Indian Health Services for the WIC program with their peer counseling program there, and also a very part-time hospital-based lactation. So my work primarily was hospital-based lactation for the last 10 years. Started in the WIC program, I believe in 2009, and then a couple of years after that, transitioned to a hospital in Phoenix called Valleywise Medical Center, and where I was there, the only lactation consultant until I left a year ago, and now I'm here doing work with Cami, traveling in country, doing the Indigenous Lactation Counselor Training program, and today is our last day here, and our last webinar for today, and so. We made it, we did it, and yeah,
Yay.
so I'm really excited to have been a part of this. Thank you, Angie. And yeah, thank you for having us.
Cool. All right. We sampamash washtemi takiapi. Good afternoon, my relatives. I'm Cami Goldhammer. I'm Sister Tamapatan, Dakota. I'm a lactation consultant, licensed clinical social worker, and full spectrum Indigenous doula. I've been in LC for almost 9 years. So yeah, 9 years. I said earlier today that my Facebook memory was I sat the exam 9 years ago today. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey over the years, but been in lactation and maternal child health more broadly for pretty much my entire adult career, which has been about 16, 17 years at this point. So really grateful to be here. In addition to being a co-teacher for the Indigenous Lactation Counselor Training, I also run a nonprofit at home in Seattle, which is where I live, Duwamish territory, called Hummingbird Indigenous Family Services. And we have 2 programs, foundational programs. One is Hummingbird Indigenous Doulas. We're a full spectrum Indigenous doula program, and Hummingbird Nest, which is a guaranteed basic income program that we'll be launching in early 2023. So that's about it. And we are going to be talking about how milk is made
Mhm.
and milk supply today. So we decided not to do a formal kind of
Presentation. Yeah.
presentation with a PowerPoint, and have some notes of things that we wanted to talk about. But how milk is made and milk supply is probably one of the most
Mhm.
commonly like asked about questions. We definitely find that a lot of breastfeeding challenges are kind of a result of not really knowing how milk is made,
Mhm.
how a supply is built and maintained and sustained. Um, and so there's just a lack of knowledge across the board around how that works. Literally, like a lot of folks just think it's super easy and it just happens.
Mhm.
Um, and that's not necessarily the case. It can be fairly easy. But breastfeeding is a lot of work, especially at the beginning. It's a
Yeah.
lot of work. And but there's a payoff at the end, which is makes it a little bit
Mhm.
easier. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I know it's all relative, right? And
Yeah.
what's easy for someone might be really challenging for someone else. Um, but yeah, we're just really happy to have this opportunity to talk about milk supply, how milk is made. And so kind of what we're thinking is we're going to talk a little bit about milk production in pregnancy.
Mhm.
Um, we're going to talk about milk production after a baby is delivered. We'll talk about how we know our baby's getting enough milk. And we're going to talk about some false alarms or what we know is not low milk supply.
Mhm.
A lot of times in the lactation community, you'll hear LCs use terms like perceived low milk supply,
Mhm.
which like it definitely happens. I sometimes get a little uncomfortable with it. It does feel like kind of like gaslighting of moms,
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
like saying like you don't have a low milk supply, it's a perceived low milk supply. But those parents still like deserve to know what's going on. And what I have actually found is that if a mom is perceiving a problem, like she's usually onto
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
and it may not necessarily be low milk supply, but we might be teetering on some
Mhm.
other ledge. And so I think it's still worth exploring and talking to that parent about. But what we know is that about 95% of the population is perfectly capable of making plenty of milk.
Mhm.
But there's a lot that goes into it. And yeah, so we're going to talk about what's not a low milk supply, and then we'll maybe hopefully talk a little bit about increasing milk supply
Yeah.
and kind of what we know about how to increase milk supply, what to do, what not to do, what might be helpful, what won't be helpful.
Yeah.
And then we will close out and head to the powwow for the weekend.
Woo!
So there we go.
Yeah.
That's yeah. I
Powwow
might need to
time.
get a banana milkshake at
Yeah.
Dawn's before we hit the road. Anyway,
You didn't get one yesterday?
I know. Can you believe it?
We just
We
like,
were right
yeah,
there.
we
I
just
know.
left. I
I
know.
know. I know.
Oh
I'm
my
sorry,
goodness.
Dawn.
Sorry, Dawn.
Sorry,
Um,
Dawn.
so I think one of the things we can kind of start talking about is pregnancy. And I'm going to also speak to this when it comes to like what I see in the hospital setting, when I'm talking to a family about what her body is doing, because it's really important to understand that um, in her pregnancy, her body does make breast milk, which is the colostrum, that is that yellow, clear substance that moms may see or may not see. And this occurs during her second and third trimester. So sometimes moms can see their milk, and sometimes when they can't, they get really, really worried. And to really normalize that during pregnancy, in those second, third trimester, that there is milk being made there because she's pregnant and she has the hormones to do the work, and her body is prepping her body to make milk and have milk available because she's pregnant, and also that her body is going to release the placenta and start going into that milk making mode. So one thing I really just emphasize that colostrum is breast milk, and we want to normalize that breast milk is colostrum, and it is like medicine. So when we talk into families, I like to tell moms like this colostrum is so important for the baby. It has a lot of antibodies, good protection factors in the milk to avoid the mom, avoid the baby from getting really seriously illnesses, especially in the hospital, especially those NICU babies. Um, that this colostrum is really protection of the baby when it comes to that gut flora. So during pregnancy, her body will change. Sometimes moms will say that her breasts have become more prominent in the change of her breast size. The areola around the nipple becomes more visible, more darker, and we like to tell moms that's very normal. It helps prepare. Um, not just a baby going to the breast, but baby able to see and target the breast when baby is born, because babies can't see very, very well. And so that allows the baby to have a place to go and to see mom's breast to breastfeed when that baby is delivered.
Yeah.
So again, colostrum, we want to emphasize that it is going to be there for baby, and also to let moms know that her breast is not going to be full of milk. She might feel some swelling, maybe some edema when it comes to depending on her birth. This is why birth is important to know that if she received a lot of fluids, sometimes that breast can be more taut. Sometimes I think Cami experienced one of her mothers that she was not able to express colostrum, and I've heard providers say she doesn't have any milk.
Mhm.
Sometimes I get a consult saying, "Mom has no milk. Please see mom." So
Right.
really like breaking it down to mom that this is what her body's doing and that there is colostrum in her breast. Um, and that these things can happen, but there is breast milk available for her baby.
Yeah, all of that
Yeah.
is important for folks to know. I love, when thinking about particularly like as lactation consultants or healthcare providers that are helping someone with breastfeeding challenges like low milk supply. I find that our job is really kind of like being an investigator
Mhm.
and trying to get to the bottom of why there is a low milk supply. Because there's a lot of different reasons for that. And that's something we'll get to
Mhm.
at the end when we talk about kind of increasing supply is completely dependent on why the supply is low to begin
Yes.
with. So it's not helpful to, tell someone to pump more when they have had a breast reduction and um
Yeah. Wasn't
there's
breastfeeding
like
well. Yeah.
and the surgery like completely damaged all the milk ducts
Yeah.
and no milk is coming out. Like just telling her to pump more, them to pump more is not going to bring in more milk or get more milk, that kind of thing. So that's just an example of why it's important to know. So those changes that a person goes through in pregnancy where their breasts or chests maybe increase in
Mhm.
size, the changes in the nipple, that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
sensitivity in the
Yep.
breasts,
Mhm.
just being fuller. Those are things that most people experience, and some people don't.
Mhm.
And so that's something that is important to know. I know I had no breast changes in pregnancy and I made a ton of milk, and so it's not a thing that
Yeah,
like
I didn't
it's,
either.
like
Mhm.
we there's just kind of no rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
I honestly like from a like now that I know a lot about breastfeeding, like on a physiological level, I don't actually know why I didn't experience any breast,
Mhm.
changes. And maybe they were slight enough that I didn't notice, or my husband didn't notice,
Yeah.
but like nobody seemed to notice. And even when I look at pictures of me pregnant, I'm like, no, I'm still like really
Yeah.
small,
Yeah.
like when I was pregnant. Um, and a lot of times as an LC, I will ask like, if I ask about breast changes,
Mhm.
and they'll say like, no. And then I'll look at the partner and be like, is there breast changes? Or they'll be in the background being like, no, they're way bigger, like that kind of thing. So, those are just, things, but, the reason I wanted to say it is that it's good information to have, because if we have someone with a low supply later on down the road and we ask about did they experience breast
Mhm.
changes, things like that in pregnancy, it's information that might help us get to the bottom of why there's a low
Mhm.
supply. Where if
Um,
they were like, oh yeah, I totally saw these changes, blah 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 blah, then we know it's probably not anything to do with like
yeah.
the physiological
Yeah.
makeup of their
Yeah.
breasts. But if there were no breast changes and there's a low milk supply, right, then I might start digging down like
Like puberty, right?
wanting to know about PCOS, what breast
Mhm.
changes did you experience in puberty,
Mhm.
insufficient glandular tissue, that
Mhm.
kind of, right, that might be the path that I'm going down.
Mhm.
But most people people are going to make plenty of milk regardless of changes,
Yeah.
but most people will see breast changes.
Yep. Yep.
So I also love that. And I just tell people, like, your baby's getting ready to feed your baby, or your
Yeah.
body's getting ready to feed your baby. That's why the very, like, some of our earliest signs of pregnancy are breast sensitivity,
Hmm.
right? And increase in cup size. And people are like really weirded out by that happening in the first trimester. I'm
Hmm.
like, it's your body getting ready to feed a baby. Like it's the first thing it kind of starts doing,
Yeah.
and in preparation
Yeah.
for having that baby on the outside. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I want to add too is when the caution that we see is very small amounts that are are available for the baby, and the reason why we make so small amounts of milk is because babies can't take in that much volume at once. So their tummy size is really, really tiny. I would say the size of a cherry, and it doesn't grow a baby. I think we talked about this the other day. The colostrum um, main role is to protect the baby. Again, the baby is not is coming out from the mom, where mom was protecting the baby for 9 months in the placenta, nourishing the baby, and protecting the baby. So once baby is out, the colostrum just replaces that protection and inoculates the baby. Like, it provides this primer in the gut to avoid any infections from any outside um, things that baby may encountered, but also the colostrum that mom is taking is already has the protection that's in her milk. So during pregnancy, another significant thing about pregnancy is in pregnancy, when she was, maybe going to a powwow, or she traveled for work, or her
Went to the
environment, went to the
store.
store, and or maybe picking up another child from daycare, all those things that she was exposed to, now her body has built up that immunity from her environment, and that picked up. And so when babies are breastfeeding, this is why it's so important that babies get human milk from their mother, or human milk. Um, it really protects the baby from really severe illnesses that can actually make baby, die. So we want to make sure that we emphasize how important that is. And colostrum is going to be really sticky. It's not going to be like the white milk that we see that transitions, that happens on day 3 or 4, and we'll talk about that. But it's like honey, so it really comes out in small amounts. First feeding on day 1 for colostrum for a baby is going to be about 5 to 7 milliliters. So that's about a teaspoon, and it doesn't. Um, it's not going to be a large amount. Again, baby is made to take this milk, this concentrated milk, to protect the baby from future illnesses, or illnesses that may be exposed to. So we want to make sure that baby is getting that milk. So again, when we're breastfeeding, there's time once that placenta is released from the mom, the placenta actually gives that mom like a clock, which is really amazing, because once that placenta is out, that little clock is ticking to exactly the age of the baby, how old is the baby, um, that exact time,
Mhm.
even seconds, that this body starts responding into the baby going to the breast and suckling. That's why latching and breastfeeding is so important those first 2 days, is that stimulation is going to um, move that process and making more milk. So we know that baby needs to grow, baby needs to get all these other antibodies that the baby needs on day 2, day 3. And so that's when we want to see that transitional milk occur. And this is where it's important that providers understand that if mom is not breastfeeding well that first day, we need to assess and provide really good support on why this baby's not latching. Um, and so, again, those first few feedings, if we cannot get a baby to latch, I always emphasize skin to skin. I think we talked about that too, is how important skin to skin facilitates those early cues to occur, mom to have that oxytocin flow. All that facilitates supply, bonding,
Mhm.
um, future milk supply. That does a huge impact on mom's ability to breastfeed and have a good supply. So typically, when mom is feeding well, um, her milk will start transition to that more copious milk. We call it lactogenesis 2, right? So then when this happens, usually it happens what, day 3, 4?
Yeah, for about 80% of people, it's going to happen on day 3 or 4,
Yeah.
between day 3 and 4. Some people it happens earlier. Those are going to be your, multips. They've had,
Mhm.
a couple of babies beforehand, maybe even just one baby.
Mhm.
You might see a transition earlier than day 3 if they delivered multiples. So they have 2 babies nursing, something like that. And then there's a couple of folks that it transitions after day 4. And if it happens after day 4, that for us is a flag. So a yellow flag, that's kind of like, whoa, we need to check this out and see
Mhm.
what's going on. Sometimes milk will transition normally on day 5, maybe if there was a cesarean birth or a traumatic birth or something like that that
Mhm.
just kind of disrupted that normal transition of milk. But in general, if milk is not transitioned by day 4, then we should be paying attention,
Yeah.
and trying to get to the bottom of what's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, for about 80% of people, it's going to happen on day 3 or 4. And that transition is going to be dramatic. So that's one of the things that I'm looking for when I'm talking to people about their milk transition is, I'll ask, when did your milk transition? I don't like to use language like, when did your milk come in?
Yeah.
Because that makes it sound like colostrum is not milk or there was no milk prior to
Mhm.
that time. But it changes, right? It goes from colostrum to that more copious milk supply, which has lots of things in it, but really it's just more sugar and water. That volume increases is that transition. So I'll ask when that happens. And if they don't know when it happened, then that's the yellow flag for me
Mhm.
too. Because most people, it should be pretty dramatic. It should be kind of a thing of like, oh no, you remember when your milk
Mhm.
transitioned, because it kind of happens like you went to sleep, your baby was like, right? And
Mhm.
then like you woke up and fed your baby the next feed 2 hours or 3 hours later and they're gulping. And
Mhm.
you can like, it's just really, really different. I know for me, I like watched my milk transition, after on day 3. And I mean, it was like a cartoon, kind of like watching my breast
Watching it
go
just kind of
like,
inflames and gets like
yeah,
a
it
balloon.
was wild. Like and I was I have hypolactation, so I made a lot of milk, so I'm not necessarily like the norm in that way. So my dramatic increase in milk supply is not what I would expect everyone to have, but it was like a cartoon. I mean, it was wild, and it really freaked me out to see, like, literally in the shower, just
Yeah.
like watch my breast grow like 4 cups
Yeah.
sideways. I was like, what is happening to my body right now?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that transition is important information to have. Because if it doesn't transition, by day 4, then that baby is likely going to be needing some additional
Yeah.
food, and we want to be figuring out what's going on, right? Why is the body not getting this message to make more milk?
Yeah.
So
Another important thing too, and we talked about this in our previous chat or talk, is that this is why we don't recommend pumping those first couple of days, because mom is not going to pump milk. Um, and it really gives them a false perception that they don't have any milk. And once they see that they're not pumping milk out, they're going to say, I want formula.
yeah,
I'm,
and the reason
yeah,
that colostrum
yeah,
doesn't come out in a pump is because there's small
yeah,
amounts of it.
small amounts.
It's thick like honey,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
And so when a brand new parent, postpartum parent, puts a pump to the chest and starts pumping, then, again, we're talking a teaspoon
Hmm.
of colostrum that's thick like honey, and it just is going to get like sucked into the little pump parts, and you might get one drop at the
Yep.
bottom of bottom of a 4-ounce bottle or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And so that can be very discouraging, and we lose
Hmm.
all of it. So that's, yeah, one of the many reasons
Yeah.
we don't want
Yeah.
people pumping
And they,
unless medically
yeah.
necessary
Yep.
early on.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So again, once that milk transitions to that copious milk, again, we want this to increase volume because babies are going to need volume. So typically on day 3, baby's going to need at least about 50, 45, 50, maybe an ounce of volume per feeding. So if mom is not giving that amount to baby, and she's having trouble with breastfeeding, unfortunately, baby will need to be supplemented with donor milk. you know, to feed that baby, because at that point it's really important that baby gets milk.
And during that time, the second a baby needs to be supplemented, we need to be working on the breastfeeding side of
Mhm.
things,
Yep.
right? So it is irresponsible for a provider to have a parent be supplementing and not also be working with that parent to up the supply or whatever,
Mhm.
like whatever, getting more milk out. However we do that, we need to be doing those things concurrently, kind of like
Mhm.
feeding the baby, and because there are reasons that we need a supplement, right?
Yep.
Like I've definitely many times as an LC, as someone who just serves people with breastfeeding problems, many times have had to talk to parents about
Yep.
supplementing. And so there are medical reasons why we would do that. And we need to be protecting that parent's supply, keeping that baby in love
Mhm.
with the breast. And we do those things in conjunction with each other.
Mhm.
We don't just feed a baby and throw away the rest.
Yep. Yep.
So,
It's
yeah.
all has to work together.
Yeah, because hopefully they'll like come together,
Yep.
right? We
Mhm.
will get baby eating better, getting the calories they need to grow, and then the supply will be increased, and then they will meet and live happily ever after.
Yes. The other thing too I like to talk about in this process is a lot of times if mom again is feeling like she's not making enough milk, and again, this is why education is so important at bedside of what her body is doing, how much baby needs is the things I encountered in the hospital was always topping off of feeding. So they would
Mm,
breastfeed again that time. The nurse says 15, 15, and then you feed the next 2, 3 hours. That's one thing I really want to share with providers is when we are breastfeeding a baby, it's based on feeding cues. And whenever the baby wants to breastfeed, the time is confusing to families where they are going to either delay a feeding, um, limit feeding, and most likely they're going to top off a feeding. So they're going to do like, I'll do 15, 15, and give 15 mLs.
yeah,
That was a pretty common practice at the hospital I worked at. Um, Also, in babies will take a bottle. They have this really strong sucking reflex that will suck down a 2-ounce bottle. I've seen it happen, and that gives indication to moms that my baby's starving. I don't have enough, so I'm just going to keep formula feeding. And what happens is that baby is going to get one use of the bottle with that fast flow, easier access to milk. Two, um, their tummy gets bigger. And so mom has a milk capacity of a 2-day-old baby, and then she's giving lots of formula, and it just causes this whole triple effect of, affecting their milk supply, baby not really wanting to be at the breast as often as they want to, and then affects the lactogenesis too, for that
yeah,
stimulation of the breast to kick in and do the things that her body needs to do for, um, make more milk.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. Yeah, so kind of talking a little bit more about the frequency of feeding, because this is a
Mhm.
really important part of establishing a good milk supply or solid milk supply, is nursing often.
Mhm.
I
Which you will do.
yeah,
Yep.
like all the time. So what Kim said is we want to be nursing a baby on cue
Mhm.
whenever they ask for it. Um and this can come up against what's often shared in hospitals. There are hospitals that they try and say like breastfeed on demand, or feed the
Mhm.
baby whenever they ask for it, but then like we need to like period stop the sentence at that point. But a lot of times they'll say breastfeed on cue whenever, or on demand whenever your baby asks for it, or every 2 to 3 hours, right? Or
Mhm.
like, or at least every 2 to 3 hours, or for 15 minutes aside, things like that. And that's what we really need to erase from our language. The recommendation is that babies should be fed whenever they ask for it, a minimum of 8 to 12 times in a 24-hour period. So that means the earliest sign of feeding cues, which is just baby going,
Mhm.
right, doing their
Mhm.
little noises. That's when we feed a baby. And they're going to be a much more capable partner when we feed them early and often. um, and especially in those early days, this is an important part of
Mhm.
establishing a milk supply, because this baby is sending a message to that parent's body that they're there, that they need to make a certain amount of milk for them, right? They're going to require a certain amount to grow and thrive, and them nursing frequently is what sends that message to the body. So we really want to encourage that. So parents should be educated about what a feeding cue is
Mhm.
for an infant, and that they should be feeding that baby whenever they ask for it. And that because we're feeding a baby on cue, that it's going to be random, right? Like it's not going to be an every 2 to 3 hour thing. It is perfectly normal for a brand new newborn baby to nurse, and then 2 hours later nurse again, and then 2 hours after
Mhm.
that nurse again, and then 3 hours after that nurse again, and then 45 minutes later
Mhm.
nurse again, and an hour and a half later nurse again, and 45 minutes after that nurse again, and then for 4 hours
Yeah.
not nurse, and then nurse again, and then 2 hours, and then repeat, right? Like that's a really normal experience, and exactly what I would expect a newborn baby to do. So that's just something to kind of think about, and we want to normalize that and give that guidance to parents so that they know what to expect. But if they are told 2 to 3 hours by a healthcare provider, it is often interpreted as a prescription or what they have to do.
Mhm.
And so then that parent may be like, well, I shouldn't feed them again, they just ate,
Yeah.
and
And
they
I'll
said I
wait.
don't need to nurse for 2 to 3 hours, and it's only been 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. And so then that baby will fuss and be really unhappy. And then the parents will fuss and they'll be really unhappy. And then everyone's fussy and unhappy, and
Yep.
it's really sad.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Yep.
it's not fun.
I'll be honest, that's what I thought
Yeah.
initially, because I heard that like every 3 hours. So
Mhm.
I
Right.
just thought that's what we had to do. And then thankfully early on, or even probably happened before I even had him, but somebody was like, well, do you eat every like
Right.
6 hours? Do
Right.
you eat when you're hungry? And I was like, oh, duh.
Yeah.
No,
Mhm.
I do. Yes,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Mhm.
But I just assumed like this is what it's supposed to
Right.
be.
Yeah.
And that does come from a formula feeding culture,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Or a bottle feeding culture, because formula is a static product.
Yep.
And so a baby has to take in a certain amount of formula to grow and thrive, right? So we kind of have to make sure they are eating
Yep.
on, like kind of a
Yeah.
certain amount and taking in a certain amount, where our milk, human milk, is constantly changing to meet the needs of that
Yeah.
baby. The caloric content of our milk varies throughout the day, right? As we get into the evening, our milk has more fat in it, and the daytime it has more sugar and carbs in it, right? It's kind of like that. The milk is what changes. It doesn't increase the amount of milk we make,
Yeah.
aside from that initial increase in volume, on day
Mhm.
one, or sorry, day 3, 4. It's pretty much the same. Our breasts, it's not like, the chest is like, oh, baby's 6 months, we're going to go ahead and increase capacity at this point. No, the milk is what changes, right? Because our
Mhm.
capacity is our capacity. A breast can only hold 1.5 ounces, or 4 ounces, or 3 ounces, or in my case, as a hyper producer, about 10 ounces aside,
Wow.
like it was, that was the capacity, right? And so that's going to vary from body to body.
Mhm.
And so a parent is going to nurse differently, right? Like, if you have a parent that their breast capacity is 1.5 ounces a breast, right? They may nurse more
Yeah.
frequently than someone whose breast capacity is 2.5 ounces a
Mhm.
Yeah.
breast,
So it
right?
doesn't matter what size of the
And it
breast.
doesn't matter what your friends are doing and how often they're
Mm.
feeding their baby,
Yep.
because you have different bodies.
Yeah.
Okay. And everyone has a different capacity, and you have different babies. And so it's not helpful for us to generalize these things or compare ourselves to
Mhm.
others
Yeah.
or normalize other people's
Mhm.
experiences. Yeah, most people are going to be fairly close, but what we know is that most breastfed babies get between 24 and 30 ounces of milk in a 24-hour period. And they will do that somewhere between 8 and 12 feeds in a day, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little
Mhm.
bit more, but that's how it shakes down. And so that's going to really vary from every
Yeah,
person.
especially what babies go through when it comes to like growth spurts.
Totally.
If they're fighting like a little bug,
Yeah.
if mom goes back to work early, um, it's amazing what our bodies can do to just to fit the needs of the baby, no matter what, just goes with it and it works out at the end.
Totally.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So we want to nurse frequently, 8 to 12 times in a 24-hour period. And we nurse until that baby is done. So none of that 15
Mhm.
stuff that we might have been told, or 20 minutes per side, or whatever it is. That baby will nurse until they are done. And then we go with the flow and we
Mm.
switch to the next side.
Yep.
And let them stay there until they're done. So that's what's gonna really establish a good milk supply
Mhm.
and a healthy really breastfeeding relationship
Yep.
or lactation relationship, is that frequent nursing. And then the really cool part about this too, which we often don't talk about, is the type of confidence that builds in a parent when
Mhm.
they know what their baby needs, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Like, it's discouraging when your baby starts crying and you're like, I don't know. But if we start, feeding them on demand, as soon as we see them kind of making those little mouth, movements,
Mhm.
things like that, then that's how a parent, learns to know their baby, right?
Mhm.
Because I think being a parent of baby it's a weird place to be, and I was just talking to a family this past weekend about it, where I was like, isn't it weird, they're like a stranger, and at
Mhm.
the same time you know more about them than anyone else in the world, right? Like, that's just a weird
Yeah.
place to be, like, nothing about them and everything about them.
Yeah.
And so that kind of responding to that baby's cues, as soon as they show those signs, that is going to build that confidence and that self-efficacy with that family. Where if we, say, like, nurse them, nurse every 3 hours, then that is actually going to kind of probably derail it, because we're going to have a fussy baby, who needs to eat more, and a family that doesn't know what they need because they try all the other things except for the feeding, because they're not supposed to feed for 3 hours,
Yep.
right? And so then it's
Mhm.
like, I tried the bouncing, I tried the pacifier, I tried the rocking, I put them on the washing machine, and they're, like, I did all the things and nothing's working, except for they just needed to, they
Yeah.
just were hungry, right? They needed to eat. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I want to talk about really quick here before we talk about how we know babies get enough is in those early feeds we talked about um, feeding cues, how often to feed your baby. But I know a lot of times we moms are very much sleep deprived. So we do have families, members, spouses, partners can say, why don't you take a sleep tonight and I'll give a baby a bottle. So when it comes to like establishing a good milk supply, we want to really uh, make a point that babies need to feed at night. So the nighttime feeds, it's important that the baby is feeding at the breast at night because that really protects one, the supply, to the hormone that makes milk is called prolactin. And so prolactin is a milk producing hormone that needs to be sustained and elevated at night. So
For
not
like
only
24 hours a
24
day.
hours, 24
Yeah.
hours a day. So that has to be there, but also fat.
Mhm.
So fat is really, really important with baby's brain development. And it has to be, very, very much a part of the sleeping routine or night routine is that baby is going to um, breastfeed throughout the night and pretty much kind of puts into order for the next day. So when we talk about sleep training, that can be very detrimental to a milk supply, weight loss, and just it can just cause a lot of problems. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. Nursing at night is essential.
Mhm.
It is essential. And would just like to echo what Kim said about, because a lot of parents do kind of want to, take a night off or
Mhm.
skip a feed, or, they're going to pump during the day and then dad's going to offer a bottle
Yep.
at night so that parent can sleep a stretch, or something like that. You can do that, and it will negatively impact
Mhm.
supply. So, I think that parents need to be really informed of how sensitive the supply is, especially in these early
Mhm.
days.
Yep.
If we're talking like a 4-month-old or a 5-month-old, and
Yeah.
the breastfeeding parent crashes out for a night and doesn't wake up,
Mhm.
that's not going to
Yeah.
make a
And
difference.
baby's taking some little
Some
bit of food.
bottles
Yep.
and
Bottles. Yep.
other things, like that's probably not going to make a difference. But in the like early, newborn first, think about establishing milk supply 6, 8, 12 weeks. um that can really negatively impact the supply, because the body on a biological level knows it delivered a newborn, and it knows newborn should be eating at night.
Mhm.
And so if it doesn't do that, then the body is going to very quickly lower the supply. So it kind of responds to that lack of feeding at night really, really
Yeah. Even
fast.
just 1 or 2 feedings can throw off
Totally.
that
Totally.
supply just in those
Mm.
early days. It's so
Yeah.
sensitive.
It's super sensitive.
Hmm.
So yeah, I completely agree. And it's really tiring. And so this is where,
Mm.
we need to be, as a society, need to be better at supporting tired breastfeeding parents.
Yes.
That the solution is not taking away the baby or taking away the breastfeeding and taking over there. The solution is actually giving them the time to just be in bed and nurse and rest, and we take care of everything
Mhm.
else,
Yes.
right? Like that kind of thing. So and that's often not the way we do things. We're
Mhm.
like, oh, we'll remove the baby from the situation and then they can sleep. And that's kind of the opposite of what needs to
Yep.
happen.
Yep.
um so yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, just night nursing is really important, and it's normal for babies and children to wake through the night well into their second year of life. So it is really
Mhm.
uncommon, actually, that a baby will naturally sleep through the night on their own before the age of 1. Many times the age of 2. In the case of my girls, age 3 and 4. Like that was just how, that's just the way it was. So
Mhm.
it can take, for my girls, they didn't sleep through the night until we stopped breastfeeding, which was a long time. They were old when we stopped
Mhm.
breastfeeding, and so they didn't sleep through the night until then. Except for, I will say, when I wasn't home, they had no problem sleeping through the night.
Mm.
So it was kind of a thing of like this, where breastfeeding is so much more than milk, right? There's
Mhm.
other things that
Mhm.
babies get from that, and the milk is kind of the bonus. And so
I still don't know what sleeping through the night is, and he's 5.
yeah,
Aw.
totally. I mean, it's one of those,
Yeah.
I mean, in general, humans, we're getting up at
Yeah.
night too, like even adults. And so it's not,
Yeah.
it's an odd expectation,
Yep.
which is why it's not a developmental milestone.
Yep.
Never has
Sure.
been,
Because it
and
varies from person to person, right?
absolutely, absolutely. So, but it is a really important part of it. And unfortunately, like, we can't not nurse at night
Yep.
and have a full milk supply.
Yep.
Like I've definitely worked with people where they make that trade-off, and that's perfectly okay, but they need to make an informed decision about that
Yep.
trade-off, right? I don't want someone to think, oh, I can not nurse at night and have a full milk supply. Those two things, it just in general doesn't work that way. But you can say, I don't want to nurse at night, and I'm okay with, needing to
Mhm.
supplement, or I'm okay
Yep.
with my milk supply going down,
Mhm.
and that's an informed decision that a family needs to make.
Yep.
So, yeah. All
Yep.
right. Should we talk about how we know a baby is getting enough?
Yep. Yep.
So, just looking at time. Okay. So when we think about how we know our baby is getting enough, there's a couple of things that we're gonna see. So the first one I want to talk about is weight gain, because that's actually
A
came up in
lot.
our previous
Yep.
conversation as well. So like Kim said, when it came to colostrum, which is the milk that we make in pregnancy in the first few days of a baby's life, um, that milk is not there to grow a baby. That milk is there to inoculate a baby and to give that baby that, prime their gut, establish that, those immunities and things like that. And so colostrum doesn't grow a baby. So it is perfectly normal and expected that all babies lose some weight after they're born. Because again, colostrum doesn't grow a baby. So we expect babies to lose weight, and average is about 4 to 7% of their birth weight, with about 10% being the upper limit that we as a healthcare system have accepted as the most we are
Mhm.
comfortable with a baby losing. I will say, if a baby's lost more than 7-8% of their body weight, I'm paying attention.
Mhm.
Where, and I think this is actually a bit of a problem in kind of the mainstream medical system, is they don't really pay attention until they hit that 10% mark. And at that point, we're a little behind the
Yeah,
curve,
we gotta.
like,
Yep.
and there was probably some things going on a few days before that we could have addressed.
Mhm.
And so, I'd call like 8% plus as a yellow flag, and something that me as a lactation consultant, I'm going to be paying attention to. Because when we see breastfeeding going really well, so like everything's going super normally, going as planned, they usually don't lose more than 7% of their birth weight.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
just something to think about. But we are comfortable with about 10%. And at that point, it's like, whoa, all
Mhm.
hands on deck, let's figure this out. Babies should be gaining weight by day 4. So when that milk transitions to that more copious milk supply, which is the milk that grows a baby, right? The volume increases, and it's the volume that makes the baby grow or contributes to the baby's growth. Then they're going to start gaining weight. We expect babies to gain about an ounce a day at that point for a long time. I mean, that's
Mhm.
kind of going to be where their weight gain is. And then we expect babies to be back up to birth weight by 2 weeks old. Again, if a baby's not back up to birth weight by about 10 days, I'm like, I'm paying attention.
Yeah.
This is like a yellow flag for me again. Like, I'm not freaking out, but I'm going to be looking a little bit closer, because I find that when babies are breastfeeding really well, everything's going as planned. They're not going to lose much more than 7% of their birth weight, and they're going to be back up to birth weight early in the second week. Right. So, but we are comfortable with up to 2 weeks to be back up to birth weight. But again, I'm going to be looking a little more closely at that point. And again, babies should be gaining about an ounce a day,
Mhm.
5 to 7 ounces in a week. So there's, some leeway in there if baby's not, not hitting that ounce a day. Maybe there's 1 or 2 days a week where they gain a little bit less. That's okay. Right.
Mhm.
But they should be doing that. A little bit about growth curves, and this is something that Andy mentioned in our last session, about Frankie, her son, who was in the 1 percentile, for a chunk of his little infancy. And so the way growth curves work is that a baby's got to be on there. So we have a growth curve or a growth chart, and we'll just use 100 babies as an example. Is we take 100 babies that are exclusively breastfed, healthy, full term, doing the thing, everything's going really well, and we weigh all those babies on their birth date, right? Like,
Mhm.
all those babies on their birth date. And then we line those babies up in lightest to heaviest, and the lightest baby is in the 1 percentile, right? The heaviest baby is 100th percentile. That's all it means. They're all normal, right? They're all normal babies, but there's just a huge range of, I've seen healthy full-term babies, at like 410, 412, 4 pounds,
Mhm.
just under 5 pounds, basically, healthy full-term babies to, or maybe 5-ish pounds is there. Because I think under 5 pounds would be considered low birth weight,
Mhm.
but up to like 12 pounds.
Mhm.
There's that's a huge range of normal,
Mhm.
when it comes to a baby. So as a baby grows, it's going to be the same thing. So, we measure those normal babies who, on day 1, we did their birth weight, and then the next day we weighed them. right? And then week 1, we weighed them. Week 2, we weighed them, and we plotted them from lightest to heaviest. And those are our percentiles. And so a baby has to be in the 1st percentile. A baby has to be in the 3rd percentile. A baby has to be in the 50th percentile, and so on. And what we want to look for is that a baby is growing on their curve. We are only comparing a baby to themselves, not to other humans. It's pretty amazing how early we start pathologizing the bodies by comparing our bodies to other people.
Mhm.
Right. And it's just a really unhealthy thing to do in general. So for babies, we're going to be comparing them only to themselves and where they are on that curve. And we, in general, a baby should be following that curve. So as an LC, I do get concerned if I see babies dropping off their curve significantly. I mean, if there's some slight fluctuations in weight, that's one thing.
Mhm.
But if I see a baby go from the 30th percentile to the 3rd percentile, that's a concern for me,
Mhm.
right? I'm gonna pay attention to that. So that's just, some little notes
Mhm.
about weight gain there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. It's just important.
Yeah, it's really important.
Weight gain is important. It's
Yeah.
an important part of it. So yeah. Next is how we know a baby's getting enough is that they poop and pee.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
so what goes in must come out. And if something goes in, then
Yep.
it's gonna come out, and that's a sign of it. So when babies are first born in the hospital, we typically are just wanting to make sure that that system is working,
Mhm.
right? So babies come from that water world. Oftentimes parents get a lot of fluids in labor, and so a baby is going to pee regardless of how much they get in. Babies hopefully don't poop in utero, and so when they come out, they're going to poop, and that's meconium, which is that dark black tarry
Mhm.
sticky,
Poop.
the poop.
Yeah.
If you haven't pooped in 9 months, is what it's going to look like, right? Like that's that kind of poop. So anyway, meconium, again, that's going to come out regardless of how much a baby is
Yeah.
getting. The colostrum helps to pass it, but usually
It
they're
works like
gonna,
a laxative.
yeah, it's
Calcium is really
laxative,
important to help.
but
Yep.
typically they're
Mm.
gonna,
I did not see. I
yeah,
did not know
typically
that either.
they are gonna poop,
Yep.
regardless. So, for the first few days, we like to see 1 wet diaper a day, 2 wet diapers on
Mhm.
day 2, 3 wet diapers on day 3. By day 4, we should be seeing about 6 to 8 wet diapers in a 24-hour period. For pooping at the hospital, they like to see 1 poopy diaper day 1, 2 on
2,
day 2, 3 on day
3, 4,
3,
and then
and
4
then,
is the increase.
yep,
Yep.
by day 4, we should
Yeah.
be seeing between 3 and 5 poopy diapers a day.
Yeah.
Um,
With the poop too, it can change colors. So from
yeah,
a meconium, black tarry poop to like greenish when that milk transitions, kind of greenish color poop. And then when mom has that more copious milk, the milk has increased in volume, then she's going to have more yellowish poop. So,
totally.
yep.
Yep.
So,
So those changes occur naturally, and that's actually another way that your baby's getting food,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Is that the poop changes from that meconium to what breast
Yeah.
milk poop looks like, which is mustard orange. And so if it's going through that transition, then the baby's getting some food.
Hmm.
But poopy diapers are really important. We should be seeing them again about 3 to 5 times a day for a long time.
Hmm.
So a newborn baby that is not pooping is unacceptable for me as a lactation consultant. And there's definitely some experiences, particularly, and this is where sometimes like getting help or support on social media can sometimes
Hmm.
go awry. Is there are stories of exclusively breastfed babies going days if not weeks without pooping, and so people will normalize that. I had a baby that did that, and she was a super normal healthy baby, and so I had this experience of kind of personally going through a baby that didn't poop for 10 days at a time until she starting at about 7 weeks until she was almost 6 months old, and it was just like every 10 days it was this massive amount of poop. And my JoJo was big baby. So that, she was clearly getting enough and she was a happy baby. So there wasn't she was having no discomfort. But I remember looking it up and reading and being, seeing that like, oh, babies that are breastfed use all of the milk, and so there's no waste, and that's why exclusively breastfed babies will go without pooping for several
Which is not the
days,
case.
which is not the case. It probably is an indication of gut
Yeah.
issues and things like that. But that information cannot be applied to a newborn baby. So a newborn baby that's not pooping is a problem. Like if I don't have a baby that's pooping and free every day, multiple times a day for at least the first 2 months of their life, that is a concern. But again, that's one of the things that will happen is when parents go to social media and they say like my 3-week-old isn't pooping or hasn't pooped for 5 days, and you will have dozens of moms that will say, oh, my 3-month-old didn't poop, like that kind of stuff.
It's
They're not the
normal.
same.
Yeah.
They're not the
Yeah.
same, right? We cannot, like, newborn babies are different. So
They have to poop.
yeah, they
Yeah.
have to poop. And for me, it's a red flag. If I have a newborn that is not pooping frequently, I'm checking them out and I'm concerned. And I had a client last summer, Kim and I were together, that was the experience, where the baby hadn't pooped for a couple days, and her midwife said it was fine because exclusively breastfed babies don't poop. And this baby was like 2 weeks old. And sure enough, this baby had lost almost 14% of their birth weight. There was a couple other balls that were dropped in the process. But this baby was not doing well. And yeah, so, but she kind of went on because the midwife had said it's fine.
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
Yeah. And all she had to do was just feed on the other breast.
On both sides.
Yeah. She was doing one
she
breast.
was just nursing on one side because her previous kids only nursed on one side. So she thought she kind of stuff. And this was, I was a super experienced mom, and we just, I almost missed it because it seemed like such a simple question. Normally I do ask, like, are you nursing on both sides or offering both sides?
Well, you kind of assume that she was.
I assume she was, as an experienced parent, lactation educator, like that kind of stuff. And then I was just like, what's going on? And then I think I just kind of like randomly asked and was like, oh, just offer the other side. And then
the weight went up.
Weight went up,
that.
pooping came, they started pooping, and that was it.
Yeah.
So really simple solution that I was trying to complicate as a lactation consultant, right? I'm trying to like figure out all these other things. And it's like, like, of course it was a easy solution. Like it's not that hard.
Yeah.
So that's what we see about wet and poopy diapers.
And the other one is just watching your baby when you're feeding your baby, how content they are after feeding. So if a baby is relaxed, we had a good video.
Sleeping.
Yep. Video of babies swallowing, taking enough food. Those swallows are really important to indicate babies getting enough, but also sleeping after they feed. I know babies just kind of, when they're feeding, they're, me, I look at their little fists is kind of like this. They're feeding. They get really relaxed, and then their hand just kind of gets really relaxed and just kind of unfolds. So their body gets really just relaxed all over.
Yep.
And they're very content. They're not looking for more milk. They're not crying, not fussy. Yep. And that tells you that baby's probably had enough.
They often end the feed on their own when a baby
They
is
come
getting
off,
enough food.
they unlatch.
Just stop.
Yep.
Yeah, and then like lay their head on the pillow or the boob and go to
boob
sleep.
pillow.
Yep. Yeah. So that is something that we'll see. And so if a baby isn't content after feeding, it could be that they need more food, right? But there are some situations where maybe a baby has an allergy or a gut, like gut issues or something like that, let's say if we have a baby that's gaining weight, they're pooping and peeing a lot, but then they're not content after feeding, then that's where I might start digging down the road of like, is this reflux? Is this a food allergy? Is there something else going on? Because these other indicators are saying like, this baby's getting plenty of food, right? So that's just always something to consider too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if folks have any questions, we can maybe pause for a minute. And if
Yeah.
people have any questions around establishing milk supply, or maintaining
Yeah.
milk supply, frequency of eating, or I shared that there be, when we were talking about growth charts, that her first baby, who I think she said is about to turn 22 yesterday, she was plotted on a formula company growth chart, which was very, very common back then. And she was considered underweight because those growth charts used formula fed babies. And so it skewed the data. So when we plotted a breastfed baby on that growth chart, with babies that had inflated weights, then it looked like that baby was underweight. And so that was actually a really common experience through we didn't really start using growth charts until the 70s, and they were all formula
Because
companies.
someone was
Like
breastfeeding.
that's who
Yeah.
put them out, was formula companies. And it wasn't until the early 2000s that we started using the WHO growth charts, or the World Health Organization growth charts. And even then it took a little while for those to get into the community. And it would not be surprising that it took a hot minute for them to reach the Navajo,
Mhm.
a reservation, right?
Yep.
Like a tribal community. So, yeah. So
Yeah.
Janelle says, is there anything I can or should be eating to get or keep my milk supply up? That is a great question.
Mhm.
Um,
This is where we would have to
know a little bit more. I
yeah.
wonder, Janelle, can we talk to you maybe?
If
You
you're
can just,
open
if you're
to
open to it.
coming on and talking live,
Yeah. We just need to know more
just raise your hand
information.
and then Mark will get you up on the screen. Don't feel pressured either if you don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah, you could just put in the chat, no, thank you. I'm gonna pass. But it'd be, yeah, Janelle, if you're open to talking with us, we can talk a little bit more about kind of what's going on, or something like that. I don't feel like that.
No,
No, that's all
that's
good.
okay.
Totally
It's all
okay.
good. Thank you for being honest there.
Yep.
So, one of the things that we'll say, and we actually will kind of talk a little bit more about increasing supply,
Yeah.
is, but we'll just address this
Mm.
now. So Janelle had asked if there's anything I can or should be eating to keep my supply up. So one thing that I would want to know is like, is there a low supply,
Mhm.
or is it more of a concern of like, I'm just making enough milk, and am not super comfortable with the, like with the,
But just enough milk.
yeah, with just
Yeah.
enough, like I'd
Yeah.
like to get more. So I'll just kind of address like normal milk supply first. So in general, eating and drinking what you want when you want to do it is going to be, plenty. We definitely have like traditional foods that we can eat. Aura, mentioned blue corn mush, is something that really helped them, thinking about what did we traditionally eat or drink after we had a baby. Typically is going to help with milk supply. And so you should be able to just kind of like eat whatever, and drink, to thirst, and that will maintain a good milk supply. If you have a low milk supply, so if you're needing to supplement and things like that, there are some foods and herbs that we can eat, or drink that might increase milk supply, in addition to doing other things. So the only thing that we truly know increases milk supply is actually nursing more,
Yeah.
or
Nursing
pumping
more or removing milk from the
moving
breast.
milk. I mean,
Yep.
that is really kind of the only thing that truly does that. But there are some foods and things that we can drink.
Mhm.
So fluid is an important part
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
We have some, and I don't know, Janelle, where your community is, or what have access to, or not, but there's nettle is a milk maker. There's a lot of different herbs on the market that you can buy to make milk. And
There's Indian tea or Navajo tea.
yep.
We hear can be helpful. Certain herbs like fenugreek in
Yeah,
some cases
shatavari,
can help. Shatavari
moringa.
and blessed thistle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are some, like different things you can look into potentially to, like increase milk supply. But really it's going to kind of boil down to potentially just nursing more or adding in some pumping if
Mhm.
that's what's going on. But if your supply is just good enough and you're making plenty for your baby, then that's actually something I really want to normalize for
Yep.
people is
Yep.
a normal amount of milk.
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
we definitely kind of like, I think get really nervous about not making enough or, but it's normal to make just enough for your
Yeah.
baby.
Mhm.
There's no need to make any extra. There's no need to have a big freezer stash. Like it's
Yeah.
all, like it's all there. It's what your baby needs. And the best case scenario is actually making exactly what your baby
Yep.
needs.
Mhm.
That's
Yep.
that's what we want, for a normal milk
Yeah.
supply.
I
Yeah.
had that in my brain too, that I needed to make a bunch of milk
Mhm.
and have a big freezer stash full of milk. And
Yeah.
um it even when we got down to like, I don't know, maybe one brick, because I put them in,
Mhm.
froze them flat, and then put them
Yep.
in these bricks in the freezer. And when we got down to one brick, which had like, I don't know, 10 or 12 bags of milk in it, like I was like panicking,
Yeah.
anxiety, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna run out of milk for my baby.
Mm.
And we never even touched it. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Good.
Because I didn't need it.
Yeah.
I was making enough milk for
Yep.
him. And so yeah. And then I mentioned this to you guys before when we were talking a couple weeks ago about how I'm in some of the milk making
Groups.
groups on Facebook, and how there's always moms posting their pump pictures,
Yeah.
and it's always so much milk. And
Yeah.
then all
It's a
and
weird flex.
and it is,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
everybody's, there's like thousands of women going, wow, great job, mom. And all I can think is, oh my
Right.
gosh,
Yeah.
it
And then
looks
there's like hundreds of moms in
that
there
are
that are like,
not
I would
commenting.
never, or they say it like, how did you do that? I
Yes.
can never get that. I'm only making,
Yeah.
Or not saying
this, or not
anything and
saying
just
Yeah.
feeling guilty because they're like, I don't make that much milk. And it's like,
totally.
because you don't need to.
You
No,
don't
You
need
do
to.
don't
not
need
need to
to.
make that much milk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gives, like you said, that discouragement, that
Yeah.
false perception that I need to make a ton of milk, and
Yep.
that's not the case at all.
Yep.
And that's even when we pump out milk, that's not a true
Nope.
volume,
Mm-mm.
right? I mean, we only pump out 70% of our breast milk when we're using a breast pump. So again, baby at the breast takes in more. There's a lot more going on with the baby latching and breastfeeding with oxytocin. That close contact makes a difference and can make a difference in your supply. So yeah, and if we had to talk to you more, Janelle, we would ask more questions. How old is the baby? Why do you think you have a low milk supply? What is your feeding like? Do you have pain? All
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah.
List a
And
lot
we can
more.
reach out. Maybe we can put our
Our
email
info.
Yes.
directly to Janelle too. And you can
Okay.
always reach out to us individually, Janelle. Kim and I are together a lot and together the next 10 days too. And so
And
we're,
then-
we
Then
have,
And then another
yeah.
2 weeks after.
Till
So,
November.
yeah, and we actually have a couple of consults already lined, that we need to talk to folks. And so we're always happy to check in with you, like in a less public
Yeah.
setting if you have specific questions too, or at minimum, like get you hooked up with an Indigenous lactation counselor, someone in your area potentially if we've been there.
Yeah.
Um,
So she has two questions. One, how can my partner help me during the night when I am exhausted and want to help feeding during the night? So we emphasize how important those nighttime feedings are. And this is where I actually show moms how to safely
breastfeed and
breastfeed
lay in bed.
and lay in bed together. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, with more rest. And I know we get a lot of health professionals saying, don't do that. But there is a safe way. You can also lay with your baby, nurse. And I used to tell families that were nervous. I always had the other partner, be with the mom, like sit with the mom, watch a movie with the mom in the same room or same space, not the same bed, but breastfeed while she rested and slept while the parent was watching both the mom and baby. And if they really wanted to, the parent could remove the baby and put the baby in a bassinet. That's what, if they were nervous. But
Yeah.
I co-slept, and there's a safe way to do it. And that's how I got extra sleep, a
Totally.
lot more sleep.
Yeah. Other things that partners could do, especially if you have a baby that doesn't nurse and go right back to sleep, right? Like,
Mm,
is that, partner can take over once you feed the baby. So they
mm,
can maybe change the diaper, burp them, go sit up with them, cuddle them
mhm,
until they fall asleep, something like that. But really, like when we have a new baby, we really have to think of our sleep schedule as we're
mhm,
now on a 24-hour period, 24-hour clock. And so, thinking about, how much sleep did you need before you had a baby? Maybe you're a 10-hour sleeper, and you just needed 10 hours a night to sleep. Now that's your 24-hour goal. Right. So in a 24-hour period, you need to find 10 hours of sleep. So that does mean napping. That does mean
mhm,
sleeping during the day, sleeping when the baby sleeps, things like that, is going to ensure that you feel a little bit rested,
mhm.
because
Yep.
it's not
Yeah.
fully rested.
Mhm.
That doesn't come for a long time. But like you feel a little bit more rested, functioning, kind of thing. Um, and then yeah,
Mhm.
it just builds on top of each
Yeah.
other. But yeah, co-sleeping, nursing while you're sleeping, and then napping
Yeah.
during the
That was
day.
huge.
And that's where partners can really step in, is like, because not to, talk specifically about your relationship, but just we'll talk more broadly about most heterosexual relationships, is that typically moms do a lot,
Mhm.
and maybe you do the housework, maybe you do, the cooking, maybe you do the laundry, that kind of thing. And this is a time where a partner could, step in and take over some of those things that maybe they don't
Normally
typically do.
do.
I have a family like that. We always say, like, I do the inside, he does the outside, like
Same.
that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And I'm cool with that. Like I'm weird and controlling, and I like cleaning, and I don't want anyone else touching my stuff anyway. So, like, I'm not complaining about it. And when we had babies, that had to shift, right? Like that
Mm.
just had to shift. Because I was really, really busy with the babies. And
Mhm.
so we had to change that, temporarily, until I could take back my duties of, like, of handling the house. But that's, another thing. And that can be hard. I want to acknowledge that we don't necessarily have partners that are supportive
Yeah.
and are able to do that. We may not feel comfortable or safe asking our partners to take over certain things. So I do want to acknowledge the varying relationships that we have, and dynamics within relationships where that might not be a possibility. But it sounds like, your partner's maybe looking for ideas to
Yeah.
help out. And that's also really, really common. It's really common for the
Mhm.
non-breastfeeding caregiver to kind of feel like,
What
what's
do I
my
do?
purpose?
How could I
Where,
help?
how
Yeah.
can I help?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
that's something
Yeah.
that can be helpful.
The other question is, what are natural medicines I can use for chapped, cracked nipples? So, any
Yeah.
lanolin,
Lanolin, nipple
lanolin. Yeah.
butters, coconut oil.
Hmm.
There's a lot of different, like different things.
Natural, organic.
Mhm.
Um, nipple butter or cream can
Yeah.
help. There's
Yeah.
no specific one.
Yeah.
Um,
I know traditionally, like in the Pacific Northwest and up in Alaska and First Nations of like BC area, would use a devil's club salve traditionally on it, on
mhm.
nipples. So there's different things, but my head kind of goes to like, why are they chapped and
Yep.
why are they cracked?
Yeah, exactly.
Because that is, we would consider that not normal. It's common. 80% of people have sore nipples, cracked, chapped nipples, that kind of stuff. But
We want to know why the
we
nipples
want to
are
know
cracked.
why they're cracked,
Yeah,
right? And chances are it's on the baby side. So really working on baby's latch, getting
wide
baby
open
on
mouth,
deeper, things like
deeper.
that
Yep, changing
will.
positions to get that baby to
Mhm.
facilitate more wider latch
that's
can help.
that's what'll
Yeah.
cure, or take care of the cracked nipples, the lubricants or the medicines are kind of,
Lubricate so it doesn't
they're
fix the
more of a
problem. Yeah.
Band-Aid,
Yeah.
that can provide temporary relief, but it's not necessarily going to
Yeah.
heal
Yeah.
it.
Cedar asked thoughts on fore milk and high milk imbalance. We don't really
Yeah.
don't think that's a
It's
thing.
not really a thing
Yeah.
anymore. So
Yeah.
I would, I when
That was
I
what it was taught when you and I were taking our
and
work
I
classes.
was told I had it,
Yeah.
and I had all the signs, and this is actually like one of the things. So what this is referring to for folks that maybe don't know is this idea that there is two different types of milk in a breast.
Mhm.
There's fore milk, which is water.
The first part of the milk
The first part of the
of the
feeling
feeding.
is watery, and then the hind milk, which is fattier. And initially that's kind of like when, like Kim said, when we first started a decade ago, this was common knowledge,
Yeah.
and we were told that, like, oh, there's these two different types of milk in a breast, and it's important that a baby drink all of the milk because they can't just get fore milk because they're not going to gain weight.
They need
and
high milk.
they need
Yeah.
that hind milk, things like that. And then there's been more research that has come out over the last few years that has told us that actually when we look at milk in a 24-hour period, that a baby is going to get all of what they need. So it's not so much that there is different types of milk in the breast, but it's that as there's less milk in the breast, the fattier that
Yeah.
milk is. And that changes in a 24-hour period. And so as we get later in the day, usually that milk we're going to have, sometimes be producing less milk, which is going
Less
to be
volume.
fattier milk. But in a 24-hour period, that baby is still going to get all of the fat out that they need.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's just really not a thing. I will say, this was definitely kind of a struggle for me because
You were
I was an
overproducer.
overproducer. And so I dropped like 4 ounces of milk in a letdown, in my first 30 seconds of feeding type thing. And my baby was not happy, like she was definitely it was called for hind milk imbalance, that my
Yeah.
baby was getting all of the fore milk and, that kind of stuff. And she had all of the symptoms, kind of fussiness. She gained weight fine. But that frothy poop, that kind of stuff. And then as my milk supply, I ended up lowering my milk supply, so block feeding, and that resolved at that point. So it was one of those things that I do think, like, if we have someone that is a over producer, there could be, and it's still when it could be called
Yeah.
for high milk,
It's just an
but
abundance of more water and
my breasts
more
were never empty,
more
basically.
carbs,
Yeah, like
more
my
things
breasts
like
were
that.
never
Yeah.
empty. I made about 10 ounces a side,
Yeah.
and my babies took about 4 ounces.
Yeah.
And so there was always milk left over, and I only nursed off of one side at a time. And, and so it was a unique situation
Oh,
that
yeah.
most people would not experience, but I definitely had those signs of
Mhm.
like that, what was called a fore hind milk imbalance back
Yeah.
then. And now we just know that the
It
less
just
milk in the breast, the fattier
Yeah.
it is. And over a 24-hour period, most babies are going to get most of what they need.
Yeah. And
So,
typically in the morning too, moms will notice their breasts more fuller and there's a lot more of that um, milk that has a little bit more like carbs and water. And so that again fluctuates throughout the day and changes throughout the day. So baby's going to get what they need throughout a 24-hour period. So there's no like
yeah.
having to pump out the fore milk and give high milk. You
Yeah.
should just feed your
We
baby.
don't need to just
Yeah.
feed the baby.
Yeah.
But it looks like Cedar had an oversupply. So she could have maybe been experiencing similar to what I,
I was just thinking
like
that
what I
too.
had to, Cedar, if you were making a lot more milk than your baby needed, then, we still, again, wouldn't call it for hind milk imbalance, but it is a, thing that your breasts were not empty. And so there was just less fat in the milk that your baby was getting.
Yeah.
But yeah, eventually it regulates, like you within a couple weeks, your oversupply is going to regulate. For me, I had to block feed. So that meant that I went up to 8 hours. I would just nurse off of one side for 8 hours. And then after about 4 days of that, my supply just, like went way down,
Mhm.
to where I made exactly, like it took care of it. But that took a long time to even get to that point and to have someone be able to explain that to
Yeah.
me, and find the help there. And it was just, it was my childbirth educator, who's is the one who told me about that,
Block
and,
feeding. Yeah.
about block feeding. But it's not something we do before 6 or 8 weeks, because we want to make sure a supply is established and
Yep.
things like that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Oh, Cedar has another question, I think.
All right. What is the approach you take on the reality of breastfeeding during pregnancy? I've been waiting for a period of time, approximately a month postpartum, to say how much work it is, just because I don't want to scare them away. Does that make sense? So you're kind of asking about like, um, how do we realistically prepare people for breastfeeding and the work involved in it in pregnancy without freaking them out, but also making sure that they have a realistic view and expectations of what it's like. Yeah.
I gotta read that again.
Yeah.
So
So, yeah.
so I think what she's saying is, um, when talking to clients, like
Yeah.
she doesn't want to scare them about
Mm.
um, how much work it is to breastfeed. She doesn't want to scare them away.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so it says she's been waiting for about a month postpartum to tell them
Yeah.
how much work it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. It is hard. And I think that, like, for me, some of the things that I say, like when I'm working with pregnant people, is it is important to set up those realistic expectations, and kind of like, I don't necessarily like, bro, it's hard, like
Mhm.
I'm not gonna say
it's the worst.
it's the worst. You're gonna hate, like, you're gonna hate it, and then you're gonna love it, like that kind of stuff. Because one, not everyone's gonna be that way. I will
Yeah.
say, like, I and Kim similar, aside from some of the challenge she had with Deemer and
Mhm.
stuff like that. But we both had pretty excellent breastfeeding
Mhm.
experiences. Like mine was pretty blissful.
Yeah, I didn't have any.
I mean, my problem was that I made 20 ounces
Yeah,
of
mine
feed.
was my
Like
DMAR, and
that's
that
not,
was it,
yeah,
and
like
depression. But yeah, I didn't have mastitis or clogged ducts
not,
or.
so many people won't have that, like
Mhm.
won't have any problems. And so I don't, I usually want to like set up realistic expectations for folks. Um, and at the same time, like it was all me, like it's just
Yep.
all
Yep.
you, right?
Yep.
And so that's where I like to, make sure that parents are aware of what having a baby is like. So again, I'm not just going to be like, it's a lot of work. It's going to be like, hey, like, let's talk about baby biology, let's talk about cues, let's talk about, these tiny
Yeah.
tummies. And
You're talking about the work
yes.
that it goes into breastfeeding without saying
It goes into
this
breastfeeding.
is the
Yeah.
work,
Yep.
right? Like you're
Yeah.
just like you're talking about the things, managing expectations, right?
Totally.
And using language that's about this is what the
And
baby's
What the baby's gonna
explaining.
do.
And
Yep.
yep. And
Yep.
explaining why they're doing it.
yeah,
Yep.
for
Right.
sure.
Because that's the isolating, scary part, is
Mhm.
being a newborn parent, is that they're doing these things and you don't know why, and no one told you about it. And so you think that it's wrong, right? Or it's a problem.
Yeah.
Like nobody said that my baby was going to eat all
Yeah,
the time.
that's a really good example,
Right.
because babies, I mean, they don't just go to the breast to eat food. They go for many reasons, like
Yeah.
bonding. I'm
'Cause
tired.
they love you.
They love you. They're
You're the
cold.
prettiest person they've ever seen
Yes,
in
they
their
just
whole
want to be
life.
next to
They
you.
love your voice.
And you cannot spoil a baby by breastfeeding them often or carrying them when
Right.
they're that small. I hear a lot of that in the hospitals. She's going to spoil the baby, put down the baby. And actually, that's what they need. They need love, right?
Yeah.
For growth.
Yeah.
Was it love,
Fat
fat,
and sleep.
and sleep? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what makes a baby
That's
grow.
what grows a brain.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
it is. Yeah. And babies, go to a parent for so much more than,
Just
than that
food.
milk. And
It's
so,
just,
so that's kind of how I like to talk about it. And then hopefully they kind of understand by, sharing the information about normal baby behavior, what to expect, things like that, then they'll kind of be like, that's a lot of work.
Mhm.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
so instead of saying like, oh, you're going to be feeding your baby all the time, it's like, oh, they're tiny, tummy is so tiny, and this is why,
Yep.
and and then it's gonna grow, and this is gonna shift, that kind of stuff. And then when you go see them postpartum, and they're like, dude, this was I'm so tired. That's when you just normalize that, validate
Mhm.
that experience,
Mhm.
and be like, I know, I'm so
Yep.
sorry.
Yep.
Like, it is so tiring, and look at you, you're doing it, like trying to do that. So,
Mhm.
yeah. So Aura says, I always tell mama way back when there was no walk, stroller, bouncy seat, there was family, grandma, grandpa, someone was always there to hold the baby, and baby was given back hungry. Hold the baby. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true. So,
Yeah. These are all good questions.
Mhm.
so good.
Yeah.
Um,
oh,
it's 4:26.
yeah, it
Yep.
is. Were you guys done with all your notes on your?
Not quite.
Okay.
We got halfway through
Yeah, we got most of it.
and
We got-
answered some good
yeah,
questions.
which
so-
actually was in our notes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
Yep, because we
We
touched
got
all
to
these.
it.
Yep, we did. We did.
Great. Well, unless there are any other questions from anybody, real quick, like
It's a
we're-
wrap.
sounds
did
to
it.
me like it's
We
a
did it.
wrap. We did it, ladies, and one gentleman in the room.
Our
Thank
tech
you.
support.
He's about to get his certificate and
I know, Mark, are you going to come to our training next week? Yeah.
My voice was fed the right way.
Yes.
Both of them.
Nice. Yeah.
yeah.
We filled the freezer.
Excellent.
Oh, nice.
All right. Well, I
Awesome.
think that is it then. Thank you everybody for joining us. If you came to one or many of our webinars, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Again, oh, did you want to say your email?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's put it. I'll do this one, Kim. I'll do the
All right, she's gonna
Indigenous.
throw her. Oh, Mark can put it in the chat.
Yeah, I'm
too.
gonna
Oh,
write
you're
it
gonna give it to him?
down
Gotcha. All
for
right, so
Mark.
we're gonna put it in the chat. Mark is typing it. It's gonna look like it's coming from me. It's
So
not
on
me.
replay, what you said.
Oh, yeah. What?
We'll have it in the description.
Okay, great.
And she's got great handwriting.
She does.
Tell people
Mark wants you all to know that Cammie has great
Thank you.
handwriting
Has a lot to do with this pen.
amongst all of the amazing skills that she has.
I also have excellent penmanship. My dad
Yeah.
was a stickler for penmanship because my dad has some left hand trauma.
yeah.
Where he
Yep.
was like really,
Yeah.
he was shamed for being left-handed and everything like that. And my dad always told me growing up, he would say, someone will judge you on your handwriting, and if you can't take the time to write
Yeah.
slowly, then they're gonna anyway.
Yeah. Yes.
So anyway, and this is my fast writing. Anyways,
Great.
thank you. I appreciate
All
it.
right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. NooniProject.com for any more information. Indigenous BF at
Counselor.
Indigenous BF Counselor at gmail.com.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Reach out to us, Janelle, if you have any other questions. Seriously.
Yep. Thank
We
you.
got you.
All right.
So,
We'll see you
all right.
guys.
Toksha, everyone.
Bye,
Go, Nat.
Mapi.
Bye.